Today is April 3rd, 2020. My name is Ann Shi, and I'm with the Houston Asian American Archive. Here we have Shari Sang Kyo on our interview. Thank you so much for being on our interview.
You're very welcome.
So can you start by telling us when and where were you born?
I was born in Taiwan in the southern port city of Kaohsiung. And I left and came over to Houston in 1970 when I was 13 years old.
Great. Can you tell us about the neighborhood you grew up in Taiwan?
So I I was born in Kaohsiung and we lived there for many years, but then we moved to the northern port city of Keelung when I was, I believe, first grade. And so we lived there from first grade to third grade. And so my memories of Taiwan take place in both cities. They're very different in both culture and climate. Kaohsiung was a much bigger port city, very vibrant. And my mother's family was from there, and my dad's family also lived there, though their family hails from even the more southern part of Taiwan. So when we moved to Keelung, that for even the short period of 3 or 4 years, my memory of it was more vivid. And I think it was just because of my age or something. And so let me begin by describing Keelung, because when we were moving and we asked our parents what it was like, and all my mom said was it rains a lot. So that's what it was like there, humid, extremely humid, and more mountainous as opposed to more flat of Kaohsiung. So my memories of Keelung was we lived in, my dad worked for the Taiwan Power Company, so we always lived in these company compounds where the houses are surround a central courtyard, and the courtyard, like in both places in Keelung, it was paved and had a tennis court or a couple of tennis courts in the middle. And the company showed cartoons and movies like regularly on weekend nights in the courtyard, and the neighbors who know each other, the men work together, and the women were, they were very close, like a little community. So we would drag our chairs out to the middle of the courtyard and watch cartoons, and sometimes there would be classical Chinese opera shows with real people, and marionette like skits. The people would come in and entertain us, and that was a real treat. A lot of my memory was about living there. And I remember the teachers living further up the mountains, and there were times when I had to go see them just for social or whatever, and just climbing up the really wet, slick stone steps up the mountain and smelling all the flowers and the leaves and touching the leaves that would that would close up when you touch them. And I don't know what they're called, but it was fun because we would just climb up and jump and touch those leaves as we go up. So that was a big part of my memory there. It's just the colors and the smells and the flowers and the trees. In Kaohsiung, it was more, my memories of Kaohsiung was more people oriented, because when we were there, in the summers, especially when we would go back from Keelung, we stayed with my grandparents, and there was a market, not like today's night market, but it was just like an open market there that we would go to on the way back and forth from church. We would stop there, and then all the little vendors along the way that my grandfather used to give us a yen or 2 yens each, and we would stop and get a snack. And so those are like really, really nice, cool memories.
Wow, that sounds like a heaven for us in quarantine.
But and food was great. I remember the food.
So what triggered you to immigrate to the US?
So I didn't come by myself. My dad had always been kind of had a wanderlust, and he I don't know, he when the war broke out, he was a kid, and he actually went to Japan as a young kid and stayed there until the war was over and found his way back. And I think he just always wanted us to go places, or he wanted to go places, but he was stuck with a family, so he had to take us along. So he was the one that wanted to see the US, and the way for him to do that was to come here as a grad student. And so he was already in, late 30s, and I guess, yeah, late 30s when he got into the graduate program in electrical engineering. That's what he was. He was an electrical engineer at U of H. And so he came here and got his degree in master's, and then brought us over 2 years later. That's how we ended up here. So.
Really? Did you know English before you came here?
I did not. I had half of a year in middle school in Taiwan. So in Taiwan, the education system is that everybody eventually got educated in English, learned English as part of their curriculum. So I had the like 3 months or 4 months of English in middle school, first year of middle school. So I kind of knew the alphabet, but not very well. So I had just gotten started.
Wow.
So no, I did not know any English, and it was pretty tough.
Yeah. How was the cultural shock?
Extremely intense. Remember that I was a young teenager, so you know how teenagers go through not just they go through a lot just internally, then with the additional added burden of a different culture where you didn't know the language. It was pretty tough. But my parents were pretty tough parents. They just, basically said, go to school and learn. And that's what we did. I actually started at, I think it was called Patrick Henry Middle School then. I think that's changed. The name has changed since then. And I did not know a word of English. And that first semester, it could have been the rest of that year, I was put in the classroom for ESL kids. And there were probably around 9 of us, and most of them were from South America, from Chile and Argentina and places like that. And so I picked up Spanish probably faster than I picked up English that first year.
Great. So how did your parents support you, or just let you like toughen up yourself?
They basically did that. My mother since passed away, but if you had asked, they were probably doing things behind the scenes that we didn't realize. But definitely, I felt like they kind of just dropped us off in a foreign place and say, take care of yourself. I'm sure that wasn't quite all true, but that's how it felt.
So having been here almost 50 years now, can you share your perspective about how Houston's changed in all this 50 years time?
Sure. Oh my gosh, it's just changed leaps and bounds. When I first came here, and I was just talking about this to my husband because he didn't quite realize that, but I'm from a family of 4 kids, including myself. I have an older brother, 2 years older, and my sister next in line. I guess it's 2.5 years younger, and then I have a younger sister that's 7 years younger than I am. So in 1970 is when we got here, and during those time there weren't a lot of families from Taiwan. It was mostly grad students, or mostly grad students or people who have been here a long time. And so as young teenagers for me and a teenager for my brother, there wasn't any other Taiwanese kids our age at all. My parents went to a Taiwanese Presbyterian church, and at their church it was us, and then they were the grad students or a little bit older grad students who had gotten married and had little kids. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have any other kids our age to hang around. So it was pretty weird. So Houston has obviously changed in terms of the number of Asian Americans, and the reason, the age of these immigrants, and the reasons why they came. They aren't all students anymore, grad students anymore. They're professionals and traders and artists and all kinds of people. And I'm really, really glad of that progress, because for me, it was pretty lonely. And I, for instance, when I finally got to, and I don't remember middle school much anymore. So from Patrick Henry Middle, I went to Pershing, and then went to Lamar High School. And at Lamar High School, I would say there were maybe just a handful of Asian Americans. Mm-hmm. And then after first year of high school, we moved to, my parents bought a house in Kingwood, and we moved to Humble. And Humble was just a newly developed, or rather Kingwood was a very newly developed community. And so myself and my sister went to Humble High. And I remember through the whole of Humble High, there were my sister, me, and one other Asian American student, and that was it. So it was, I think I integrated into the typical teenage American society maybe a little quicker, because I didn't have other Asian Americans to hang around and share that kind of culture and spend time with them. So I basically was kind of forced into assimilating quickly.
Mm-hmm. How about?
So go ahead. Oh. I am actually really envious of young Asian Americans here now, because they can have their feet in both places, in their own heritage communities and the regular open mainstream American community.
Yep, we are much more privileged nowadays, I guess. Speaking about the cityscape in your...
I'm sorry?
Speaking about the Houston cityscape, and you're an architect, how does that change? And how do you feel about it?
So for me, when I graduated from Rice and got jobs, it was difficult for both women, and not as bad for Asian Americans, but for women, was not readily accepted. It was a male-dominated industry, and that's really changed. Even though when I went to Rice, and Rice was very advanced in this way, that they accepted equal number of female applicants and the male applicants. And I talked to younger generation, and they all tell me that I think there are more women applicants into, you know, to go get into architectural schools nowadays, and they're graduating more women architects. That's really changed from my time. So when I went, and I don't know what the number of acceptances now, but when I applied and got in, it was 16 women and 16 girls and 16 boys. And when I graduated, after basically 6 years, because I did 4 years of undergraduate degree and then 1 year preceptorship and then 1 year of the professional degree, when I graduated, I think there were maybe 1, 2, 3 women that completed the program. And I would say that was maybe only half of a third of the total number of kids that graduated with a professional degree. So that's now very different.
Wow. So before we moving on to your career, can we also talk about the your demographic of friends in Rice, and how has it changed?
The friends at Rice, is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay. So at Rice in architecture school, I wasn't very social. I was like super hyper focused on architecture. So besides my roommate and a few friends at Jones College, which was a all women college back then, my friends were the other architecture students. So that's, you know, that's how it was.
Was there someone who's like a mentor or a very important person that impacted your life decisions during that time?
Well, all my professors were really great impact on me, both positive and negative. And I really, I think that my education in architecture school at Rice was really excellent. It was not all wonderful and happy at all the time, but I had an okay time. Let's put it that way. I was a little impatient in that I wanted to be done and out of school and start doing the real architecture instead of just theoretical stuff. Probably by the end of the third year, I was like, you know, I need to be done and be out in the real world and practice real architecture instead of architecture on paper. But I think the professors were all excellent, like I said, and they did guide me in supporting me. But I also understand and heard from other students that that wasn't always the case. So I don't know.
And you doubled major in art history as well as architecture, right?
Yep.
Yeah. What was your decision? I mean, why was your decision?
Oh, it's an easy position in that a lot of classes overlapped between architecture and art department. I actually really wanted to do studio art, but I took a couple of studio art classes and was not impressed with them. So I pivoted my focus to art history. You know, our architectural school required a lot of architectural history, art history, and so on and so forth. So they just overlap. So, I mean, it wasn't like I really loved art history. It was just something easy to get at the same time. But I did love doing art as a studio practice. But I just didn't feel that Rice, at that time anyway, their studio classes were anything that I wanted to pursue.
So at what point did you start making art for yourself?
So I started art when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I've did art through my life. Basically, my mom was the my first art teacher. We weren't wealthy at all, so paper and paints were really hard to come by. So my memory is that my mom showed me how to paint a tree on old newspaper, and I remember her mixing different colors to paint the leaves, and that was like my aha moment, because I was doing just green for the leaves, and she was adding pinks and reds and yellows and browns and blues, and I was like, and she said, you know, if you just look closely in the real world, leaves are not just green, and that applies to like a lot of things. And that's, I think that was the moment I got hooked. So I started doing art, and it comes really naturally, and started, you know, having my art been selected for shows and things since kindergarten on. And so I've been doing art my whole life. It got intensified in high school. I remember staying up all night without my parents knowing, but just staying up all night doing art, just painting away. But once I got to Rice, that's when it kind of took a sabbatical. I focused on architecture, and that followed by getting married and having a family and trying to start an architectural practice. So art was put aside until probably 2007 or 6, when my kids finally left home. It's like, oh, I can do art now, I have time. So that I picked up art again. You know, it became a good part of my life since then.
Did you receive any formal training during this time?
I took a couple of workshops from the Houston Watercolor Society. So before then, when I said I did art, I did a lot of watercolor. I experimented with oil. I did acrylics, and I actually did pottery, which I loved. So when I decided that it was time for me to get back into art, I thought I chose watercolor because that was my first experience ever. That's when when my mom started showing me, well, at that time when she showed me how to paint as a grade school kid, that's the medium I used. So when I said, you know, it's time to go back to art, I thought I would be more comfortable with watercolor. So I took a couple of watercolor classes and workshops from Wash, and learned how to fix mistakes. You know, I don't know if people know how tricky it is to use watercolor. I would say my previous experience was, if I made a mistake, well, there goes a really nice, expensive watercolor paper. But these teachers actually showed us how to save a painting. Just, you know, that one mistake isn't the end of the world. So that I learned a lot of great techniques and discipline. But watercolors and medium is also something I still do, but I'm just all over the place.
So do you work on other mediums?
I do. I have done mostly acrylics recently. The only medium that I have not gone back to is oil, and it's I just don't have enough patience. So acrylic, watercolor, casein, which is very much like watercolor, and I also do three-dimensional objects and three-dimensional work on flat surfaces like paper.
So from your perspective as both an architect and a practicing architect, and making art at the same time? How does that impact your art?
So um, that's something I've been thinking about a lot since I started back in art. And because of my architectural training for almost more than 40 years now, I can't help but being an architect. So it keeps cropping up in my art. So my art has a tendency to be very geometric and about buildings and built things. So I've been the last few years conscientiously trying to get away from that and to put more organic subject matter contents and ideas in my work. I also read a lot. I love science fiction, and I read a lot of nonfiction books like history, philosophy, religion, and all this stuff. Um, and I love anthropology and just all kinds of stuff. Like E.O. Wilson is one of my heroes. But so all those things influence how I paint now. When I said I'm trying to get away from the very geometric shapes and forms of architecture, I am also trying to incorporate these things that I love, like science and math and music and all that stuff.
So yeah, I remember you have a really interesting expression on the cosmic world. Can you tell us about your understanding about concepts like the singularity or the parallel universe and all these the science fiction taken us into?
So I'm really into the concept of well, some people call it string theory, but I've heard people panning it, the idea, but the multiplicity of things, of our society and religion, and even the way of looking at science and literature. It's I like thinking about different ways of looking at a specific thing, and that includes the idea that time can coexist in some world that I don't know. But even here now, at my age, I constantly think about my past, and because of the books I read and ideas I have, I constantly think about the future. And what's happening now with the coronavirus, that makes us think about the future too. And like how we have faced pandemics in the past and how we're going to move forward. So we exist not in just our time now, because we exist in all these times. So I've been trying to express that, I guess, in my art, sort of borrowing something or referencing something from the past, and where we are now, and imagining what our future could be in different ways. So it's a challenge to me in that content-wise on my artwork, it's kind of hard to figure out, because it's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning and a lot of I guess pre-planning, which I'm not very good at.
So would you introduce any, say, digital medium into your art, like digital dimensions?
I don't know. I haven't thought about that. That's a good question. I'm not really good at digital things, because that came much later in my life. To illustrate that, for instance, in architecture school, I was way too old for any CAD program or anything. So it was maybe my third job when I had to learn how to do AutoCAD. And actually the first program, a computer-aided drafting program that I taught myself was, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was a different program than AutoCAD. And I, like, wow, I trained myself to use this, and I was so proud. And then of course that program didn't last and got replaced by AutoCAD. So I had to teach myself AutoCAD all over again. But nowadays, that's all what students do is they design on computer. I did not get any of that. In fact, I understand that architecture students use laser printers, 3D printers, and laser cutting to make their models. We had chipboards and X-Acto knives.
Oh.
Yeah, so some of my art comes from that period of my life. Still very good with an X-Acto knife.
So, why are you so attracted to the cosmos? Can you tell us about your resonance to it?
It could be because I read a lot of science fiction and watch a lot of science fiction movies, but no, it's come from all sides. I am also a gardener. I have a wildlife certified backyard garden, and it has to do, I think, with our current environmental crisis. And humans are a nomad kind of group of species, right? They go from place to place to place to place. Like we, humans came from the Middle East through China, and some went to Europe, and some went to Taiwan. And from the very southern tip of Taiwan, they went to all the islands in the Pacific, and then on to the Australia and all that stuff. That's they know this through language studies and cultures and stuff like that. So we're always constantly exploring new territory. So I think that we're not bound to Earth, and for certain we are going to be going out to the stars, because that's where else to go except to the stars. So I think that's inevitable. I'm personally really excited about that prospect. And since I'm also a gardener, I grow my own vegetables, and I do so I also study seeds and methods of disbursement, and that's how I think of as humans, is what we're seeding the cosmos. And I don't know, so maybe that's not all so good sometimes when I think about how we could kind of destroy a place, but hopefully we learn from our past. And what I was going to say was, because of my studying gardening and things like that, I'm also really interested in how the space station and how they're growing edible greens in space, in these ships, and how eventually we might be able to, with different farming methods, we might be able to grow these plants. So the series of paintings that I did recently, one is called, I see, On Seeds and Stars, and another one is called On Tendrils and Journeys, and then another one is called On Shoots and Generations. It's those, they reflect, I guess, my internal exploration in possibilities of what eventually could happen. But it's not like a prescribed future. It's kind of like just, it's out there for us to think about.
So what is the process of transferring what's in your mind to what's the paper in front of you?
So it's twofold. It's both the idea and the materials I have at hand, and what I am interested, the materials I'm interested in doing at the time. Recently, I've started doing using paper, both two-dimensionally and three-dimensionally. And so I wanted to, I guess, intertwine the materials, the medium I use, and the ideas I'm exploring. So it's, again, it's like every day is different. I don't know. I mean, tomorrow I may be doing something else.
Do you think there are aliens out there?
I hope so. Right now, I don't think so, but just because we haven't heard from them, but I really do hope so.
And what's your favorite piece of art that you created so far?
Oh, So I probably like my three paintings that have the three-dimensional shapes on canvas. One is called Ode to Butterflies. One is called Paean to Moth, and the other one is called Adagio for the Lodi Moth. They are all similar, and so I have a tendency to move from one thing to another, but when I'm doing that thing that seemed to work, I do multiples of it just to make sure I cover everything. So these three are an experiment in that I'm using the cut papers forms on and gluing them on canvas, and also strips of colored magazine pages on like a collage to explore that idea. So those three I really like, but there is another work that I really like that I made recently, and it's there are three in the series, and they're called the Tree Bark series, where again, it's a three-dimensional work on two-dimensional surface. But this series, I actually tore out pages from a couple of books I read. One was called The Science of Good and Evil, and the other one was, now I can't remember the name of it. It was not a very good fiction book, so I didn't mind cutting that one up. But I tore the pages from those books and cut them into strips and painted them to make them look a little antique, and then folded them, and then glued the edges with the folded edge on canvas, along with painted undertones on the canvas already, and strips of pages from magazines and things. And the strips of books is very textural and three-dimensionally. And the idea was it was maybe it was just an ideal on trees, because like I said, I'm a gardener, and of course I love trees, and trees can save us, help save us through this our crisis, our environmental crisis. So we need to plant more trees. But I was looking at tree barks, and different kinds of tree barks and textures, and how long they live. Like, we all know oaks can live a long time, but did you know pecan trees can live more than 300 years too? Things like that. So I was studying the tree barks, and I decided to use these books to mimic the textures of tree barks, but at the same time tell the story. So the whole idea was not just to illustrate or try to mimic the textures of a tree, but using the books as a way to say, well, we used to anyway, before the digital era, we used to make books and print books and newspapers out of trees, right? To impart knowledge, and books make books out of them, and books are very old and very current, Even though they're not very future, there will be some books that would live on, right? They'll live on forever. So that was the Tree Bark series. One is called, they have, I won't tell you what they're called because they have very poetic names, very long and poetic names. But it's kind of the trying to unify all the ideas with the materials and make them something that's cohesive. What's really neat about the series is something that I did not realize would happen when I'm done with it. And so it was when I finished them and I hung them in my studio, and with the spotlight shining on them, I walked from one end of the first one to the other end of the last one. And because of how the light shone on the folded pages of the book, there was a movement in shadow and light that I did not know was going to happen. It just sort of happened. I thought, oh, so cool. I didn't know. So it was more of an active, engaging piece of work than just a piece of art that you see and that's it. You know, this was like, depends on where you hang it, what the light condition is, and where you're standing. There's shadows and lights that will be different in every situation, and so that was really neat.
And I'm actually curious, what are the poetic names and where do you draw them from?
Oh, names are very important. Art names are very important for abstract paintings. I think without them, a viewer may not understand what the artist is trying to do. So the names are exceedingly important. And I spent a lot of time, I spent a long time thinking about names. And for this one, for this series, it's like I had to go back and examine the reason why I started wanting to do it and how I did it and why. And so one is called, in fact, they're very long. One is called let me see, Show Me the Secret Beneath Your Skins. And the second one is Tell Me All That You Have Seen. And the third one is called Oh Tree, Gather Up All My Thoughts for Me. So it's about how some trees have been there for hundreds of years. They've seen a lot, they've heard a lot, and we have such short lives, you know, we're just in and out. And they're kind of sturdy and strong, and they have seen, and you know, they know the history. It's like some, especially, you know, at least some of them, and how trees are really wonderful in that way.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed that. You kind of have this embodiment of tree and human that's a little bit like the Taoist, like men, human as one, and then body as one, I guess. Yeah. And did you have any influences in your art from your earlier years in
in Taiwan?
And Qilong?
Sure. I would say my dad was a huge influence, and also all my art teachers. I think my dad was a big influence because he bought me my first set of watercolor paint and brush, and a you know, one of those things that you can carry on to do plein air painting. And I remember getting that when I was in Keelung, like maybe third grade, and our we would have field trips, art field trips, where people carried, you know, students who carried these equipment up to the mountains. And I remember one time we went up to a mountain and we kind of set up our paints and board, and looked down onto the city, and we painted that scene. And So that was very, left a huge impression. But my dad would take me to art galleries and museums, and since I was a little kid, and among all of our siblings, I was the only one that he would take to go see these things. And I guess he sensed that I, really liked art. But I was like wowed by the art that I saw as a little kid. Like, wow, you can do this, or like, oh, that's a cool way to mix colors, or things like that. So he had a huge influence, and along the way, I guess a lot of almost all my art teachers saw something, and so I had a lot of encouragement all through my life. In Kaohsiung, at my grandparents' house. This is a kind of a neat story, I guess. My grandparents' house, in Taiwan, the houses are butted up against each other in the city. And so their house was butted up against this. They had a 3-story house, and next door was a 2-story house. And the 2-story house was an old-fashioned, what they call Japanese style house, where everything was made out of wood, and it had a sloped shingle roof. Well, my room where I hang out, we didn't have like private bedrooms or anything, but we lived in what we called new house versus the old house, because they were living in the old house, and then they sold that and built the new house next to it. So it was 3 stories, and there was a room where there was a window that opened onto the roof of the old house. As a kid, I don't think any of the adults knew this, but I would crawl out of that little window onto the rooftop and sketched the scenes of the streets underneath, and there would always be things going on, funeral processions, big wedding parties, and just things. People lived on the street, so I did that a lot.
Wow, that's a beautiful scene itself.
Thank you. It's a really wonderful, nice memory for me.
And how many say local galleries or institutions that you have been involved with? I know you mentioned that the Watercolor Society has helped giving you some lessons, and I learned from your material that you're involved with the Archway Gallery. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Archway Gallery?
Yes, Archway Gallery.
Sure. It's a gallery-owned, artist-owned gallery. And it's, for me, it's doing art is a very lonely thing, right? You create art by yourself most of the time. And so Archway Gallery is like a family to me. It's a group of like-minded artists who we exchange ideas, we critique each other's work, we encourage other, we promote each other. It's more of a artist family than an art gallery. Yes, although we do sell our art through the gallery, it's a community. Most of them, I would say a lot of the members have been there more than 10 years, and some have been there more than 20 years. Archway Gallery was created in 1976, I believe, and the first space they had probably, I think it's like, I think 76, almost 40 or 50 years old, 40 years old. So their first space, the first group may have been only like 6 artists, and their first space they rented from the Jung Center. And if people are familiar with Jung Center, there's a series of 3 arches in the front of the building. So that's where the name came from. So ours is the 3rd location, I think, or 4th location. But So we, all the artists own the gallery and we run the gallery. So we're intimately familiar with each other's work and with how the gallery is run. And so if anyone walks in, you're going to meet a real life artist, not a salesperson or a gallery owner. You're talking to an artist. And so it's a really cool concept, I think. And we, you know, we have autonomous decisions on our own art and our pricing system. Each artist has his or her decisions on those things. So it's the control is in our hands, not someone who's selling art for us. So that's a very cool thing, I think.
So would you identify yourself as an Asian American artist or an American artist in general?
Oh, I never thought about that. I would say I'm just an artist. I happen to be Asian American, and I happen to be a Houstonian, but
Yep.
no, it's because my art doesn't reflect my heritage necessarily, because and actually some of it does, and it changes. You know, for instance, when I went back to Taiwan 5 or 6 years ago, for the first time in my life, I came back and created a body of work that was called Dreams and Memories. And so I did half of that before the trip. It was more like dreams, you know, my memories of what I remember Taiwan was like when I was there and how I felt and stuff like that. And then after the trip, I finished the whole body of work, and it was more like going back and then not reliving, but everything's changed, right? And so that was the Dreams and Memories series. So that one had more of the, I guess, the Taiwanese influence or Asian influence. And some of those works were of Japan, because we also went to Japan. And my life growing up, there was a big Japanese influence.
So flipping to the other side of your identity as an architect, can you tell us a bit more about your experience with the IMPA's office that you had in?
Oh, sure. So that was in New York, and I would say I met IMPA himself only once, but boy, everything everyone has ever said about him is true. He was this big shot architect, right? And a lot of big shot architects behave like big shot architects, but not him. I worked on a big office hotel project that was in Singapore. But I mean, our team was based in New York. And I was just, you know, an intern from school, right? And so it was a team of maybe 20 architects, and plus me, the intern, not an architect then. So I, you know, did things like I drew bathrooms and things like that, that, you know, real architects didn't do. But there was a piece of the design that wasn't figured out. You know, so in architecture, you have the design, and then in the process, you have the design, and then the design gets carried into the construction documents phase or the contract documents phase, where you're doing drawings, like, you know, plans and elevations and nuts and bolt things like that. So usually, like for intern, I was in the production side of the project, and because at that time, most of the design phase had been finished, except there was this big lobby space that wasn't designed. It was, I don't remember why, but it was a big empty bubble that no one had figured out. So as an intern sitting there just doing door swings and bathrooms, I had and I don't remember how this came about. I had a chance basically putting my 2 cents worth on the design of this lobby. So I did a quickie sketch, gave it to the top designer. And so we had a team meeting, the designers and Ian Pei himself. And some of the bigger people in management sat down for a meeting, and they invited me in. And Ian Pei was going through all these suggestions of space, and he saw my sketch and he liked it. And that from there they developed, the final design from. And he was so personable and so humble. And he spoke to me, the little me, it's like, wow. So that was really special, because he, just because you're a very good and famous architect doesn't mean you have to be so stuck up or anything. You could very well be like him. And it was just wonderful. And then of course living in New York was pretty exciting to me, because I'm from very provincial Houston, right? So New York was really exciting.
Were there many Asian or Asian American in the office back then?
There, on my team, there was me, and that's it. There was a Greek girl, and somebody, I think she was Polish, but no Asians on my team. But you have to remember that company then was huge. We were in the more than 100 people working, so I wouldn't have seen the others really, because our team was pretty isolated.
How about male and female ratio, which is
there were more females than males, and it was the team was more international than what you would have found here in Houston. It was just back then in New York, it was more diverse. I think I don't know about New York now, but Houston has become really diverse, and I'm really, really glad of that.
Yeah. So yeah, I also want to touch up what we spoke briefly about, that being an Asian American and female. Did you experience any sort of discrimination here in your career?
Probably, but I may not have known it. And if so, it was really not to my face, but I know that, well, actually there have been a couple of instances a long time ago, hopefully things have changed, where people would say things like, well, maybe you should calculate this, you guys are good at math, things like that, or that Asian female Asians are more submissive, so they take orders better, and so they do what you tell them to, which did not sit well with me.
Definitely.
Yeah, but not so much directly to me.
Got it. And how did you start your own company?
In 1993, and it was, so my husband is also an architect, and so when recession hits, it's like we're not, we both are doing well, or both are doing poorly. But in 1993, I have 2 kids, 2 sons, and they were, I want to say 6 and 8, or 7 and 9, I can't remember now. And they had gone to daycare, because I've worked and my husband worked, and so we found ourselves in a situation where we would get home tired from a full day's work, and after working all day, picking up the kids on the way home, and it was like cooking dinner and do homework, take a bath, and do this, da, 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 and we were doing that just like boom, 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 and it felt like we were just running from one day to another, to another, to another, and we weren't living a life. We were just doing routines that we have to do in order to make it to the next day. So my husband and I sat down, and I never really enjoyed my jobs. I enjoyed the people I worked with, but I don't know. My husband says I have to be in charge, So we talked and decided, you know what, we just need to kind of take a chance, and for him to stay working and for me to basically hang my shingle out, and so I could have the kids at home when school's over, and not so the whole family as a unit, we're not rushing from one thing to another. And so that's our decision. In 1993, I decided, okay, it's time to do that. So I was working for a architectural firm in Houston that specialized in schools, and I was project architect. I can't remember what I was doing on this particular project, and it wasn't done. I was hoping it would be finished before I decided to take off, but we had planned for me to quit so we can take a driving trip out to somewhere. I think we went west, and before school started. So it was August or September. I quit and then took off for 2 weeks of vacation and came back. And this firm, because I didn't finish the project, and typically they would go to someone else, right, to take over. And so they called me and said, well, since you're not here anymore, do you mind working as a contract architect for us? And I said, sure. So money was still coming in. So I actually, from that project, went to another project and I helped them. And then I never burned bridges, and I had a network of other architects I know, and they started referring me projects that were too small for them, that they didn't want to do, or bad timing or whatever. And I said yes to every one of them. And so it took off from there. And I've never looked back.
Wow. And moving on to slightly more contemporary topics, do you think AI will be able to take over any of the jobs, or either?
They're already doing that. So yes, so AI is doing that already in architecture. Mm-hmm. And am I being a little soft? So in the old days, you had architects, and then you had draftsmen. Mm-hmm. And then when we were younger, you had architects that both did drafting and design. And nowadays you have architects that are doing only BIMs, or that's like a 3-dimensional software program that puts buildings together. So you don't even need draftsmen anymore. You have people doing the computer work, but that's all integrated. So it's not architects anymore. That's the program is integrated with, say, can be integrated with what a contractor does, and what the client gives you, the program in terms of program. So it's already happening. So now there are no draftsmen, but architects are doing that kind of things. And unfortunately, a lot of architects are also designing using software programs and not really looking at the real tactile things, and that influences the design. We see so many buildings, especially houses, that it's so funny, we call them AutoCAD elevations because they look like they are computer generated.
How about the artist side? Do you think AI can replace artists?
Probably not. um, I don't think so, because I think art is more, it comes from more from the soul, whereas architecture, you're responding to a client's program.
Mm.
So it comes from a different, they come from different places. So yeah, unless we become sort of what Kurzweil said, you know, the 21st century man, that we evolve to be part human, part droid. I don't think, if that happens, who knows? But if that doesn't, I think art would remain an internal, personal, soul-based form of expression.
That's great. We have artists that has the better employments in the future.
I don't know about that.
Well, how has technology, do you think, changed the way we enjoy art? And how do you think art will be defined and perceived in the future?
Well, so I am seeing a lot of installation work that is computer based. And I think that's really cool, because the viewers or the participant can be part of this make-believe world, or in the art or something. And I think that was harder to do before computer and programs and AI and all that stuff. And I'm so I don't know, maybe one day we can actually smell things, for instance, which we can't do yet, you know, not an interactive sort of way, but we experience light and movement and all this stuff through digital technology and already. So I think it's just going to go much further and further. I'm afraid that I'm old enough that I won't be in that wave of creatives doing that, just because it's really still kind of new and strange to me. But who knows? I think anything is possible.
um, how about your community involvements? Like, are you spending time with volunteering? I know you mentioned that you're.
Yeah, I do some volunteering through my church, First Unitarian Universalist of Houston, and we are a very humanist, I guess, based kind of organization. So we do a lot of volunteering. I sign up for any, like we do I think it's called Rebuild Houston. Like we fix up houses that need fixing, and we feed the needy. We tutor students. So whenever opportunities arise, I sign up for that. And the grace meal thing is something that I have done for a while, and that it's sort of a regular volunteer thing. And so I do that. And you know, right now I'm just kind of trying to transition from that from architecture to more art. So I'm kind of doing a lot of art to try to make that happen. So you know, time is always very limited, but I wish I could do more, and I do more.
And do you sell most of the work that you made?
I can sell most of my work eventually. And if they don't sell, you know, I also give a few away to good friends. But that's it's nice to be able to pay for your you know, equipment and paints and canvases, but it's not my sole purpose. For doing art, it just makes me happy. It's a therapy.
Yeah. And Do you mind if I ask how you met your husband? I guess that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a year ahead of me. And he took 2 years between his fourth and fifth year. And so when we went back to school in fifth year, we were in the same class. So it's when we met, and we, I don't know, yeah. I mean, I kind of knew of him before then, and he knew of me. I don't know if he knew about me before then, but so it wasn't until fifth year that we kind of said, hey, and so we started talking and became friends first.
Okay. And how old are your children? You said.
Oh boy, so so I love math, but I'm really bad at numbers. So have to calculate even my own age. So I want to say that they are probably 31 and 33 or 32 and 34. I'm not sure which. I have to go back. It's 20, this is 2020. 33 and 31.
Yeah, that's right. And when they were growing up, did you try to expose them to more like Asian side of the culture, or do you try to help them to speak Mandarin?
So I try to, I don't speak Mandarin that well anymore. I speak Taiwanese. I tried teaching them Taiwanese when they were little bitty kids by speaking Taiwanese to them. But I gave that up, pretty quickly, because it was, for me, we have very little time together at home because of daycare and school and work and all that stuff. And so the evenings were spent sort of barking orders at them. And so I tried for a short time to speak to them in Taiwanese, but it was like after, a few months, you still are met with blank stares. It's like, okay, never mind. So, and that was the extent. And my parents tried also to speak to them, but that so did not work either. It's just, yeah, but they are, even though they didn't get the language, I think just through our families and food and our table discussions of topics and history and culture and cousins and things like that, they are really plugged in to the Asian culture, the Taiwanese culture. They both are. So besides the language, they I kind of identify themselves as Taiwanese, even though they're half and half.
Do you take them back to visit?
We did. When we went back, we did.
And I was so happy to receive your recipe. Can you tell us if you cook often, and what?
It's one of my favorite dishes because it's very quick, easy, and delicious, I think. So it, the memory of that dish as I was writing it was a big part of why I liked it, because when we lived in Keelung and would go and visit my grandparents, I remember my parents putting us kids in the train by ourselves. And I would say I was probably only, 8 or 7. And so my brother was probably the oldest he could have been, was probably 10. And then, like 10, 8, 5.5, and the little 2 or 3-year-old. And they would pack, bags of snacks and oranges and just send and luggage and put us on the train and said, you go. And my grandparents will be at the other end to receive us. But I remember, of course, my brother was put in charge. But so that the train trips were an important part of my memories in Taiwan. And then just the hawking and calling by the vendors of food, of this and that, was very important. And so I think, I don't know about my siblings, but we all have adapted some of these recipes to for our own families. And my kids, especially the older one, loves this dish so much. He makes it for himself and for his Taiwanese and Chinese friends. And when we were in Taiwan, he actually went and actively sought out this dish. So yeah, it's kind of, I think we saw them on the train now when we went back, and now they of course have the vendors pushing the carts up and down inside the trains instead of selling them on the platforms, but they're packaged like bento boxes, bento lunches. So that's what that dish is.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you really missed from Taiwan?
So I miss the food, cheap and delicious. I miss the night market, and so that didn't exist when I was growing up. But so we had these open grocery markets that we used to go to. So I think those turned into the night markets, and I was just blown away when I went back by the night markets. How many of them they were, how popular they were, and how delicious and cheap the food was. So I miss that a lot. So things had changed in, I don't know what, 40, almost 50 years, and I like it the way it is now. Of course, we always miss things from our childhood, but I kind of don't dwell on those things. I look forward to the new and improved versions.
I guess, can you share with us a moment in your art creation? Like, what is the one experience or one memory you had that's when the magic happened?
Well, that story about my mom showing me the colors of the leaves are made up of multiple colors and not just green. That was the aha moment for me. That was the first time I picked up a brush and paint, and it just that was I was hooked. That was what changed. So I also do a lot of other kinds of crafts other than art. I knit and I crochet, and I've done quilting, and I sew, although I don't like sewing very much. I did pottery in high school, but recently I picked up doing air dried paper clay. And what else do I do? Like garden, I guess that's kind of an art. But so I don't know if this is an aha moment, but I realized that an artist creates the work to reflect himself or herself, and so a person looking at the depth and breadth of my artwork would say, well, you're doing like watercolors and acrylics and this and that, and you're doing super real hyperrealism to totally abstract, and what to focus. And so maybe I realize that this is who I am. I'm constantly changing, and I'm bringing all that's me into my artwork. So for instance, I've done the 3-dimensional paper on 2D surface, but since I've picked up the air dry paper clay, I've been thinking that I want to bring that into a two-dimensional surface as well. It's kind of like what they call in music modulation. I think it's not um, a 90-degree turn, but a steady progression of one branch to another. And so I guess I'm trying to embrace that this is me. You know, you want to call it, I don't know, crazy or off the wall, bouncing off the wall, manic depressive maybe. But that was one thing that I had struggled for a while, like trying to have a artistic identification of myself, like, and this is what I do, this is the style, this is the content, this is the method. But that to me seems really boring, to be stuck with some one thing only. So I tend to go into something and just do it to death and then move on, but not forgetting what I have just done, but maybe incorporate it into this new thing. I guess that's kind of a eye opener for me, that that maybe that's what I need to do, that's my identification as an artist.
I guess before I conclude, can you like share in front of the screen if your grandchildren or grandchildren's children and so on found their great-grandmother's archive in our Houston Asian American Archive at the Fondren Library, which I hope they do. Would you like to share something with them?
Oh, wow. Never, oh, geez. I would say that be your true self, and where you come from is always going to be part of who you are. So celebrate it, whether it be, you know, racial or geographical or you know, philosophical. Just be open, be curious, be embracing of everything and everyone, and be kind and nice, and our world will be a better place.
Wow, that's very heartwarming and very appropriate for our time right now.
Yes. Strange times.
Well, that's all I have. Would you like to have anything else to share with us?
No, I'd just like to thank you so much for contacting me to do this. It's been fun and a pleasure, and if this helps somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure it will. And yeah, thank you so much for your precious time and your really, really upbeat and positive messages, your life stories. They're wonderful.
Thank you so much, Anne.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.